Welcome everybody back to another Tech Talks with the Founders. This is episode 7. So we may have missed a week, so hand slap there. But we are back, and I'm going to tell you why we missed a week as well. It was our fault, but not our fault. But we'll go into more details of that in a minute. Obviously, for those who are new to this, and we hope we are getting new followers and new viewership to this is every week we release a mini podcast, which is Tech Talks with the Founders. Usually, ideally, we would have both founders on. So today we only have one of the two good-looking founders on the video today, and this is obviously Thomas Green, who's the technical director, but also obviously one of the co-founders of the business. And one of the things that we like to do is talk about an array of topics. One of the ones I'm really going to start digging into is what is it like running your own business? And I think there's a lot of support that we can give to other entrepreneurial people who are setting up a business, especially in this climate. You know, what does that look like? How do you thrive in a competitive market? How do you thrive in this market? How do you thrive under a Labour government? Okay, let's see if we can still do that as well. So we cover everything from process mapping, strategy, technology, business, and everything in between. But if there is a topic that you would like for us to discuss, please send them through. Send a message through either on YouTube or on LinkedIn. And this is where we post these podcasts, so on LinkedIn and on YouTube. And that goes out every Wednesday. So if there's something that you'd like us to talk about, once again, around business, around technology, process mapping and strategies, or anything like that, send that through and we will do our best to be able to cover that in one of the forthcoming episodes. So we're going to get into, actually, at first I should say, how are you doing, Tom?
I'm good, thank you, Denzil. Yeah, really good.
I like it. As you can see, usually I'm in a shirt, but I've got the new Everywhere t-shirt on. So Tom is the past, I am the future when it comes to, obviously, the t-shirts, but hopefully you guys like. But yeah, so I actually really like these. Tom actually ordered these as well, so thank you, Tom. Just trying to make our podcast look a little bit more professional. So let's get into this. And I'm going to tell you what we're going to discuss today. And it's actually quite comical, actually, due to an error that happened last week. But I wanted us to talk about picking the right technology, right? We live in a world of technology. We talked about IoT. We've talked about Apple. We've talked about, UWB. We've talked about a lot of things. Smart buildings, smart hospitals. What does that all look like? So we talked a little bit about technology, and there was a lot of technology. You wake up and everywhere we talk about self-driving cars, Apple devices. There's just technology awash. But how do you pick the right technology? And I tell you, the reason that I say that, it's easy to think that as a technology business, as we are, that we always get it right. And then we've got it all together when it comes to technology, because obviously, Tom and John are coming from IBM and SAP and having technology backgrounds and degrees, that they should have it all together in a technology business. But that's not always the case. Right, it's not always the case. We don't always get it right. Okay? Yeah, that's it. But this is where I want to show our vulnerability, right? And we all need better technology to help thrive, and I'm going to explain that. So a couple of weeks ago, me and Tom and John were at the EBME show, and we thought it'd be a great idea to do a live podcast at the show, talking about innovation. We were in a whole arena of different innovation, and what does innovation look like? Okay, and we thought it'd be a great idea to be able to record that. Now, we weren't prepared in terms of the technology that we required, but we thought, hey, we got an iPhone, so one of our colleagues had an iPhone and he started recording, and we're churning out some heavyweight content. It's got to be our best podcast by far. And I can say that because none of you are going to see it. And I'll explain why in a minute. 100% the best podcast. But what we came to realize after recording that, spending a lot of valuable time, recording that and, trying to have a professional shoot, was that when we actually listened back, the feedback was terrible. You could hardly hear our voices and things like that, because we didn't have the proper equipment. We didn't have the proper technology and hardware to be actually record a podcast on the move or on location. So that's a great learning for us, because obviously when we wanted to post that, we couldn't. So hence why, we're a podcast down in terms of our posting these out. But what it made us realize that actually we've got to get the right technology in place if we want to do exceptional things. And then it got me thinking, how many companies, obviously that's one example, but how many companies today could be thriving in an area of their business if they had the right technology? And I think so many companies, that I went to a large organization recently, and their technology is, if anything, non-existent. But with our technology and the conversation we had, we could be taking them from here to here. But I've got to get the right technology. So one of the things I wanted to do is, talk about picking the right technology. So obviously, as a head of technology, I think we've got the right founder on the call today. So I'm going to kick off and start is, how do you know when to look at technology for your business, or for your company, or for anything that you're doing? How do you know technology is now the thing that you should be looking at? What are your thoughts on that, Tom? How do you know? So let me start that. So let's say that you're not a big business. You're an SME. You're a small to medium-sized enterprise. Okay, and you started off being a one-man band. Now there's 10 of you. Okay, and things like that. How do you know when you think, gosh, technology could take us from here to here? How do you know?
I think it's easy. I suppose there's a warning that perhaps needs to be said first off, is that I think technology can be seen as a panacea, and technology led or technology first can be seen as that's the way to go. And whilst not, perhaps not in all cases that's wrong, but I think, how do you know when you need technology? It's probably when, certainly for a growing business, it's probably when you hit some kind of capacity limit, maybe. You've potentially got an issue that you need to fill, or an issue that you need to solve that you can't do. I suppose what I'd say straight off the bat there is that technology is great, but it is just a tool. So it should be, what's the tool that you need to do a particular job that perhaps you can't otherwise do without that piece of technology? And the key thing to have in place there is making sure that actually you've got the right processes around that, because so often what we see in businesses that we go into and we work with is that they'll be looking for a technology solution, but they haven't actually considered the impact of that solution or that technology on their existing business processes. And therefore, putting that technology in place actually then highlights other issues in either other parts of the business or those business processes where, okay, now the technology has solved that particular problem, but there's a much bigger issue at play. So it's always a tricky question to answer.
Okay, so can you give us an example then of that? So you're thinking about technology, but that actually awakens a different beast that causes even more problems. Have you got like an example of what that would look like? Because instantly we all think, put technology in and everything's going to be better. But sometimes you can put technology in and it can actually make things worse, is what you're saying.
Well, no, not necessarily worse. It just highlights that there might be other issues that need to be solved around that. So take a recent example of where we've been working with a group of hospitals, and they've implemented for the first time some tracking of pieces of equipment between that group of hospitals. And it's not that they've never kept track of where these things are, but they've been manual processes. And of course, these hospitals are always sort of operated independently. Once you put in a piece of technology that sort of gives you that end-to-end picture of how these bits of tech, how these assets are moving between these hospitals, all of a sudden what that does is then highlight the issues with each of those individual hospitals' processes, and the fact as well that in that scenario, their business processes aren't necessarily aligned. And that's not because the hospitals themselves are doing anything wrong. It's just that they're also different departments in different hospitals. So all of a sudden, you've applied a technology solution to solve one problem. But what that's done is also then highlight the fact that that is part of a bigger picture. That, okay, in order to actually then take that solution and make that even more effective, they've then got to focus on the surrounding processes. So it can have ripple effects. And I think if you don't necessarily consider the ripple effects, you can look at a technology solution and think, and this is particularly, I think, where you might, you could perhaps talk about the quality or the scope of the solution that you might look for, the technology that you might look for, is if you don't consider those potential ripple effects, then you might not choose the right technology, or you'd have an expectation that this technology that we're going to pick is going to solve this problem, and then you're left with the fact that actually the technology's highlighted another problem, and it's really easy to go and point the finger at the technology and say, well, hang on, this technology hasn't solved my problem. So, there's also how you assess the effectiveness of that technology that you're going to put in place. And that's also something to make sure that you know the problem that you want to solve before you go ahead and try and, fit a piece of technology into that solution space.
Okay, so that's a really good point, because that leads to one of the questions I wanted to ask. So what are some of the key things then to consider? So I'm a director of a 10-man business. I know if we can improve our processes, we can be more efficient. And I believe technology can help me to do that. Maybe I'm even thinking about AI, right? Everywhere I've gone, everyone's talking about AI. And I'm like, if I had AI, maybe my business can go from here to here. So what are some of the key things that you would say we should consider, or a company should consider, when looking at technology around that?
Yeah. So I'd start with context. I think understanding the context, making sure that you can articulate the problem that you want to solve. First and foremost, and really establish some scope around that. So, what's the problem you want to solve? What's the scope of that problem? And really understand the sort of the problem space, so that you can sort of start to articulate what are going to be the constraints of the solution to solve that. I know that probably sounds a bit abstract, but I think that's really important. Especially in context of, let's say, business processes as well. So if you're wanting to track some assets and that's part of a particular business process for asset management in that department, make sure that process is well understood before you think, well, we're going to solve this problem, but actually we don't know how to measure the efficacy of that solution. I think other things to consider is, I think it's easy to think about like the wrong tech. Those are the easy ones to look at. Things like, and you hear things like buy cheap, buy twice, or and there's also an interesting one that an old boss of mine, he had a phrase which was technical debt. You take on a solution.
Was that again? So I missed that.
So it was a phrase he used called technical debt.
Technical. Okay.
Like that. Yeah. So what that meant was that when you take on that solution, obviously you've got to support that, but you've also. So I suppose there's a good example of that is Microsoft versus Apple, right? So Apple famously will update their software fairly aggressively, and if you've got old versions of that hardware, there'll be a point where you need to upgrade, otherwise you're not going to get the new software upgrades. Microsoft sort of, at least up until fairly recently, I think, I'm not an expert, but Microsoft have a much longer support of perhaps older hardware. So they have to keep track of a lot more, different drivers and different versions of software. So there's a much, so you look at the Apple versus the Microsoft code bases, and Microsoft is much bigger because there's just much more to deal with. And it's kind of the same in businesses. Is if you're putting in a solution, you've got to know that you've got to be able to maintain that for a longer period of time. And I think that also goes to, what kind of quality do you want to go for there as well? Because, and this comes out, and I think we've talked about this before, and where you can look for what kind, especially when you're looking at hardware, right? So if you're looking for a particular device, it's really tempting to go and sort of Google for, what's the cheapest tracker for this, and you'll come up with, okay, you can get this thing for 20 quid from China or wherever, and you think, great, well, that's really cheap, and I can do that. But actually, if you're not considering, well, but I also want this to work for the next 15 years, these are really critical pieces of equipment that we want to track, and what's the impact of having to replace those things before the intended life cycle? So there's another great quote that I like, which is, I'm not sure who to accredit this to, but it says something along the lines of, if you don't think you can afford to do it right the first time, what makes you think you can afford to start over and do it right the second time?
Oh, wow. Love that.
So, so it's, there is that point of quality there. And I know that then obviously as technical guys always get accused of always trying to have the absolute best. So, you always want like the gold-plated Rolls-Royce option, but actually, it's just making sure that you've considered, when you put something in, and quite often the reason that we do that is because we know that whatever solution you put in, even if it's the cheapest solution, you're then going to need to support, and you're going to want that to run for a long period of time, and you're going to want to be able to make that work. So, that's probably a long-winded way of saying that, there are lots of things to consider when you're going to choose the right technology. But obviously, it's easy to look at, I think, the issues of what happens if you pick the wrong technology.
Yeah. Here's the thing as well I was thinking about, because obviously we've got it from one angle where I'm sitting there as a director of a 10-man business and I'm like, actually, what technology can help me, right? But what about those people who don't even know? Because there's so much out there in the world of technology.
Yeah.
How do you stay abreast? You're a chief executive, you're operating director, or whatever it may be, and you're like, I don't even know. So how do you stay abreast? So we talked from one angle of someone who says, okay, I know, and you've given some, some real key pointers of what they should look at when they're looking to implement technology to help that process become more efficient and more profitable in the end. That's what business is about. But what about if you don't even know? How would you, what kind of, where would you look, or how would you find out? What kind of things would you say? Or do you tend to find, especially because you came from the place where you were doing a lot of consultancy in your past, helping companies, was you reaching out to them as a technology company, or, as a consultant, or were they coming to you in the main?
There was a phrase I used to like, which was, trusted partner. I think that's quite important. If you're not really sure where to start, then make sure you've got somebody you trust to be able to advise you on that. And that might be a technology partner. It might just be somebody that has sort of some technical knowledge that you can trust, that aren't just going to try and sell you a solution. I think if you don't know what technology's there, then I think it is sort of perhaps stepping back a little bit and going back to the point where I started, which is you can kind of go back to first principles of looking at, okay, let's understand what the problem is before we look for a solution. So even if we don't know the breadth of technology that's available, the thing that you do know and is in your control is how you articulate the problem. So if you can do that, then it's easier to then do a technology assessment. And that's either engaging with a technology company who can provide that kind of expertise, and making sure that you find a technology company you can trust as well to give you, I suppose, objective advice. But also, that's going to help you be able to search. If you don't know what you're looking for, then the first question is, well, what kind of thing do I need to be looking for? How do I carry that out? What are what's going to be effective to solve that problem? So again, it all comes back to, do we understand the problem? And that, I suppose, it's fundamental, and I guess we take it for granted, right? Because in any kind of, certainly in consulting project life cycles, or in any kind of technology project life cycle, you start with the requirements. So do we understand the requirements of this project, this problem? Can we articulate those in some kind of requirement specification? Can you then scope those to narrow down what is the scope of this problem? Because you might not want to deal with all of it at once, but can we prioritize and scope that into sections so that at least then we can say, right, we're going to go and tackle this bit of the problem. And also that gives you some kind of measure and metrics to be able to say, if a solution to this is found, how are we going to assess its viability and potential success? So it's a little bit of it's not necessarily straightforward, and it's perhaps is a little bit longer winded and say, well, I can just, install this piece of software or buy this piece of technology and it's going to fix all my problems. And I think that's probably my biggest concern with AI at the moment, is that as with all new technology, it's going to be seen as this can just do everything. It's going to learn automatically. It's going to fix everything. You've still got to understand what is it that we're asking it to do.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think that goes back to the whole analogy how this podcast started, is that, when we looked at us wanting to do a podcast on the move, AI wouldn't have solved that. We had to know what the problem is. Well, the problem is we need better microphones so that can come through, and better lenses, because And the thing is, as you said, you could have we tried to do it on the cheap, right? Well, someone's got a great iPhone and it's an iPhone X or iPhone 13 or 15. I can't keep up. That should be enough. But actually, it is good tech, but it wasn't designed for that. So you can go cheap, but you've got to get the right tech. But you've got to know what you're trying to achieve.
Yes.
So I think you answered that really well. So I'll tell you one of the things, obviously.
And here's my latest. I was just going to say, here's my latest technology problem. The sun's come out.
Yeah.
and my camera and my setup is not quite adequate for this light level. So,
that's it. So we'll have to get the right tech for that as well.
There's always something.
There's always something. And technology is always moving. We've always got to continue to progress. But I think one of the things I'm going to do as we come to a close, and hopefully people have found value in that. And what we try to do is keep these podcasts. Ideally, our head of marketing tries to say it's 15 minutes. We're over about 20 minutes now. But to give you enough value that you can take away something from this and implement that today, without having to go through a whole hour and implement that. But I tell you one of the things I'd like to do is do a giveaway, actually. And one of the things that we talked about is that the guys, Tom and John background was in consultancy within IT as well, looking at process mapping, looking at how technology can help. How can you get better productivity and increase your profitability? That's what business is all about. Okay, so one of the things we're going to do, and we wasn't planning this, is we're going to give let's say 2 15-minute consultations for free. Okay, you don't have to buy our products. You don't have to be looking at IoT whatever. If you're a business owner and you're on LinkedIn, let's say, for instance, or you see this on YouTube, okay, we're going to give you a 15-minute consultation. We're going to have two, one with John or one with Tom, or you could have both on each call. Okay, so that may be one person who gets both if you're a lucky winner, or if we get a high demand, we'll only be able to give you 15 minutes. But we're going to do that for you because we want to see everybody win, because we always believe that there is enough room in the market for everybody to win. And one of the reasons why we did this podcast is to bring you value. So we'd like to be able to do that. So we've talked about how do you pick the right technology. Well, Net's utilized our guys who've been able to do that for customers and do that for you for free. Once again, you don't have to buy our technology. You don't have to be a customer. You don't have to be a client or anything like that. We just want to be able to offer you great value. So if that's something for you, obviously you can communicate with us via DM on LinkedIn. And I personally will get back to you to book that in. So once again, thank you, Tom, for your time. As I know you're incredibly busy, and there's a lot of coding going on for our new software stuff that we're working on, which is really exciting. But obviously, if you found this video interesting and if you found it enlightening and beneficial to yourself, please subscribe, especially on YouTube. Like on LinkedIn, so we know that we're going in the right direction. So once again, obviously, these videos are released on a Wednesday. Every Wednesday we're going to be releasing more and more, especially now that we're going to get the right technology in. Hopefully we won't have to miss a week. We'll get that in. But once again, if you've got something that it's pressing on your heart that you want us to talk about, send us a message to myself, DM through LinkedIn or DM through YouTube, and we will try and get that in the next podcast. So we look forward to seeing you. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next week for Tech Talks with the founders.